Everyone out there talks about data structures and algorithms for interviews using platforms like LeetCode and HackerRank. But as you may know, out there are other types of interviews like pair programming interviews or home assignment interviews. In this video, I'm gonna show you what's the best way to manage an home assignment interview. Everything starts with a brief. So usually you receive a brief via email and it contains almost everything you need. As you can see here, we have this Quiz Builder app. We will have the estimated time and effort. So that's pretty much how much time we want to invest in order to make this project. We have the task scope and expectations. This is a real home assignment. The first thing that we need to do is to debrief everything. So we read the brief once and then we reread the brief from scratch with calm, a little bit of relax, and we need to read everything in detail, because in this kind of interviews, requirements are really important. Your task is to build a Quiz Builder application. So this is the main focus. Users should be able to register and sign in. So in this case, we need to think, okay, so we have an authentication service or something, and we need to use email and password. Good. So we don't need, for example, SMS verification or something else. So we already know how to implement kind of the email and password authentication. We can use a simple login form, or we can use Auth0 or Firebase authentication. That's also good. So this means that we can choose between them, or we can also implement both the features. So usually on a production system you have login with email and password, but you also have social login using Google and so on. Authenticated user must be able to create a quiz. Every quiz has a title and consists of 1 up to 10 questions. This is really important because we know that the user must be authenticated to perform this action. This means that we need some control on access, and the user can perform some actions. For example, creating a quiz. I would say that every time you heard something like create, you must implement the entire CRUD. So you will have the create, read, update and delete. Now we have some specifics about the quiz in this case. So we know that we have to implement a title and 1 up to 10 questions. As you may see here, we don't have any information about the technology. Usually in order to choose what technology to use, you have two heuristics. First one, use the technology that you know. If you already know Node.js and React, use those technologies. Don't use, for example, I don't know, Django and Angular. Doesn't make any sense to me. And the second important thing is you're applying, for example, for a Python role. So if you both know Django or Flask and Node.js, ask to the interviewer, can I use everything I want, and do you prefer I use Python maybe for this task? Okay, back to the brief. Now we know that we have a title and 1 up to 10 questions. Each question has 1 up to 5 possible answers. Beautiful. Now as you can see, we have multiple question types. Okay, this means that we can have a question with a single answer or a question where we have multiple correct answers. This means that once we plan the database schema, we have to take into account also this stuff. Another requirement: the user is expected to select all the correct answers for it to be considered answered correctly. Perfect. Otherwise, it's incorrect. Add all the questions and then the quiz can be published. Okay, this means that maybe we can have some states for the quiz, so maybe it can be in draft, can be published, unpublished, and so on. Okay, the quiz must have a permalink. This means that we need to generate a permalink. We can use a code which is auto-generated, or we can just use the quiz ID. That's up to us. Okay, randomly generated. Okay, so here we have more information. A randomly generated sequence of 6 alphanumeric characters. User can share the link and you can take the quiz even if you are not authenticated. Then, in the end, once the quiz is completed, all the users must see a score showing the number of correct answers. Okay. And you don't need to record the visitors' answers to the test results. Right now, while reading, we are debriefing our brief. We are understanding what we have to do, and later on we will understand also some security requirements, non-functional requirements. When you do something like this, My advice is to have a piece of paper or another Google Sheet or whatever, and you take notes, because here there is a lot of stuff going on. As I said before, requirements are so important in this type of interviews. So keep in mind that if something is written here, you have to implement it. Like, for example, every question has 1 up to 5 possible answers. You have to do it. Keep in mind that sometimes it happens that you just don't do it because you misread something, or you just skip something, and that's a big mistake in this kind of interviews. Let's go to the functional requirements. We already read something, but maybe here we can have further insights. Of course, every user only access their own list of quizzes. Okay, single or multiple correct answers. Every quiz can be published. Once published, it gets a permalink. Permalink is randomly generated, and published quiz can't be edited anymore. This is a new requirement, so keep in mind that once the quiz is published, you cannot edit it and you cannot delete it. Now we are in the technical requirements section. This explains us how more or less our application needs to be built. In this case, we will have client and server architecture, and we can choose between GraphQL or RESTful API. The client application needs to be a single page application. This means that we have to use a framework like React, Vue or Angular, one framework that allows us to create single page application. The API should not be coupled with the front-end application. That's really important. For example, this means that if I want to make something using a template engine on the backend, I cannot do it. I need to create a web server that exposes APIs, both GraphQL or REST, and a separate client. Be mindful of edge cases. That's really important. Keep that in mind. Control everything. You have to do a lot of validation. User validation is really important, of course, in production applications, but in this kind of interviews, it's really important that you check everything, both on the front end, both on the back end. You have to do all the validation that you can on all the edge cases. Keep in mind that even if this is a simple application, must be really robust, and you want to avoid every fail in the application, every issue. So every time some data enter in your system, keep in mind, validate them both on the front end and on the back end. Of course, be mindful of security and data validation. Usually you also have the milestones and task delivery. This means that, for example, you have a deadline to submit your work, and then after you submit the code, usually you have another interview with someone which will read your code, download it usually, try it, test it, and then will make you a lot of questions on your code. Keep in mind to test everything, to try everything, and when you make a choice, like for example, I want to use this library, I want to use this, I don't know, authentication mechanism, I want to use this validation mechanism. You have to know why you are doing something. If someone asks you, okay, why are you using JWT instead of a session? It's not a problem if you choose one or another, but you have to say, I choose this authentication mechanism because of this, and that. Alright, now that we make the debrief, let's jump into the code and see what's happening there. Before we go deep into the code, I want to show you the final result. So here we have a couple of pages. Here I can start with a new quiz. I can log in, I can sign up. So as you can see, this is the sign up form, which is quite simple. I can log in, I already created a user, I will submit. Alright. So now I can add a new quiz. The quiz title can be programming languages. Alright. First question, what is the best programming language? Okay, answers, we can say Java, we can say PHP, and then we can say JavaScript, and then we can say Python or whatever. Now we add a new question and we can say what are JavaScript frameworks or libraries. We can allow multiple selection and we can say Django, and let's add Vue, and then Laravel, and also React. Okay, here we have to say that what is the best programming language. I would say for me it is JavaScript, so this is the right answer. And here I really like to say, okay, what are JavaScript frameworks? For sure Vue and React, and we can save the quiz. Okay, as you can see now the quiz is in this draft status. So if we want to publish it, we have to go on update and then publish. Okay, now as you can see, we cannot update the quiz in published status. If we want to update it, we have to unpublish the quiz and we can allow updates. As you can see here, we have to go to the quiz. This is the quiz code and this is a link so that I can go here and I can take a quiz. What is the best programming language? I would say is JavaScript. And what are JavaScript frameworks or libraries? We can say Django and Vue. Send your answer and this is my current score. I go to my quiz results. In this case I'm authenticated, but it's not really necessary. I can also do a logout and then I can still take a few quizzes if I want. And as you can see here, I am taking the quiz result. I'm saving the quiz result. Yeah, I can also delete the history, of course. But here there are the quizzes that I created. If I want, I can update and I can unpublish. Alright, now that we have a clear understanding of how will be the final result, let's jump into the code. Okay, welcome into the code. As you can see, I just created a Lerna monorepo. So we have two repositories, one for the backend and one for the frontend. For this project, I used React and Node.js, no TypeScript this time, because this is a really old project for me. It's kind of 1.5 years ago. And at that time, I wasn't using TypeScript that much. So I just said, hey, you know what? Since I don't know TypeScript so well, just use plain JavaScript. As you can see, inside the main package JSON, we just have the dev script. And let's take a look to the front end. So we have the source, we have the assets, we have the atoms, because in this case I decided to use Recoil as a state management kind of. But this is a really straightforward React application, nothing fancy. I choose to use Undesign for the majority of the components, and here the rationale is I prefer to use libraries or frameworks like Undesign because they are really quick to implement and it is like a boilerplate, so I have tons of components already there and I can use them. When you don't have enough time, I think that using this kind of libraries is perfect. Then we have, of course, the custom components that we created. We have all the pages that we created, a few services like to handle the APIs. That's not the best way to handle APIs, of course, but it is a really simple way. So here I have, APIs to get quiz info and so on. Then we have our entry, we have our router. If I am authenticated, I am setting the Axios defaults to set this token. Then I have my navbar that in this application is always present. Then I have a few routes if I'm logged in, a few routes if I'm not logged in, and I have the routes for everything pretty much. For the backend, I just created a simple Express server, and as a database, I used the MongoDB. If you're choosing what database to use, you can just refer to your job application and you can ask to your interviewer, do you have a preference about the database that I can use? Or if you just know one type of database, maybe MongoDB, you can just use that database for sure. Now, as you can see here, we have our server. There is Helmet to improve security. This is a really straightforward Express server. We are using Mongoose for the connection between Mongo and Express. Let's get started from the models. So I have the quiz model, which is slightly more complex than the other, but as you can see, we have the answer schema, we have the question schema, we have the quiz schema, and the quiz has a title, the status, the code which is generated, all the questions, and also the created by. Then we have our user. As you can see, the user is really straightforward. We have just the first name, the last name, the email, the password, and if it is active. Because of course we can have a user that has been created, but maybe the account has not been confirmed via email. So this means that the user has been created, but is not active because it's not been confirmed. Now we have just a couple of services, like a simple logger. The main goal of this class is to validate a quiz. So I pass in a quiz and I say, hey, is this a valid quiz? I am respecting all the requirements that I have for this quiz. If yes, you got 0 errors, else you get an array of errors actually. But this is an implementation choice. I prefer error messages because they are simpler to debug, but of course you can also throw errors. Then here we have our unique ID generator. Let's go to the routes. As you can see here, we have a few main routes. The first one is for the user, then we have the quits, and then we have the take quits. For the quits, we are using a middleware, a custom middleware. I prefer to not use things like Passport or other predefined middlewares. I prefer to create my own middleware this time, also to showcase that, you know, I know how to create middlewares in Express. I know how to manage manually, you know, the JWT verify stuff and so on. The main goal of this middleware is to get the request, find the token, decode the token, verify it, find the user on the database, and if everything goes well, I am just adding to the locals the user. Then we have our controllers. So I have, for example, the controller to create a new quits, publish a new quits, to unpublish a new quits, and so on. And inside the routes, what I'm just doing, as you can see, I'm just calling the controllers. So really standard approach, really easy, and also simple to maintain. Also, I created a simple folder with a couple of basic tests in order to check that everything works, and when I make a change, I don't have regressions, at least on the backend. Even if this project is not so complex, it involves stuff like saving on a database, having REST APIs, and of course, authentication and authorization. Just to summarize a couple of tricks that I learned along the way. When you have to do an interview like this, first of all, read really well the brief, invest some time in reading the brief, taking notes, really understanding the requirements, both functional and non-functional. Second thing, validate everything. You don't want your system to crash or to have problems during the demo, and you don't want the interviewer to find potential issues or potential edge cases in your system. Third thing, use technologies that you know really well. If you are a Flutter developer and you have to make a mobile app, use Flutter, don't use React Native or other technologies, and clarify as much as you can with your interviewer the technologies that you can use and that you cannot use. Last but not least, make a lot of questions. If you have questions after you read the brief, after you understood the brief, just send an email to the interviewer, ask all your questions with bullet points, keep it short and sweet, but if you have anything that you want to clarify, just do it. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this content, and I will see you in the next video.